Sand lashed Ethan Cole's face sharp as a thin knife, and his eyes watered under his brim. At the ranch gate, a shadow stood too tall for any woman, and it didn't flinch from the wind. She was Apache broad in the shoulders, hard muscle rising under torn buckskin, bare feet smeared with old blood. Rope bruises ran down her arms, circling her wrists like somebody had tried to claim her. She lifted one hand, not asking for money, not asking for food, only asking for one night inside. Her voice came low through the grit. "Let me stay. I'll do anything just until morning." She held his gaze and said, "I haven't had sex in months," like it was bait for a wolf. In that copper dusk, Ethan saw the eyes of someone pushed to the edge and still standing. On the rack by his door, the Winchester 1873 hung quiet, a warning that didn't need speech. Ethan swallowed, slid the latch, and opened the gate while far hoofbeats tapped closer on the buried trail. If Old West truth fits, you subscribe and ride with me into tomorrow's trouble and mercy together. Friend, have you had your water today? Ethan swung the gate wider, and Tala Redbird stepped through, moving slow like every step argued with pain. Behind her, the wind shoved sand against the rails, and far hoofbeats faded, then returned, then faded again. He didn't invite her with words, he just held the lantern steady and walked backward toward the porch. Tala kept her chin up, but her breathing rasped, and Ethan heard grit in each swallow she fought. Inside the cabin was plain: a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and a hard-working stove. Ethan set the lantern down, and the light climbed her shoulders, showing bruises, rope burns, and old scars turned dark. He wanted to ask who did it, but swallowed it because questions can sound like cuffs. He fed the stove with split logs, and the iron belly glowed while the storm kept clawing at the boards. Tala stayed by the door, eyes on the latch, counting exits, like other folks count prayers. Ethan poured warm water into a tin cup and set it in her hands, careful not to brush her skin. He warmed beans and venison and slid the bowl across slow enough that she could refuse. She ate fast, yet her eyes stayed on him, like kindness always came with a price. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and asked, Aren't you afraid of me?" Ethan rubbed his jaw, glanced at the Winchester, and said, "Most men are, but I'm afraid of the cold." That answer didn't soften her face, but it loosened her shoulders a little, like she could set one weapon down. Ethan laid 2 blankets by the stove, pointed to the floor pallet, and left his bed alone. Tala watched him do it, then said, "I'll leave at dawn. I don't want trouble following me here." Ethan looked at the window where sand smeared the glass like smoke and answered, "Dawn won't make the trail kinder." She studied him a long moment, then asked, "If I stay, what do you want from me?" Ethan shook his head and said, "Nothing, Tala. You don't owe me work, talk, or your body." The word body made her blink, and she whispered, "I haven't had sex in months," like she was offering a shield. Ethan kept his voice low and said, "I ain't buying you, and I ain't taking what you don't choose." Outside, a horse snorted, and a man's laugh floated past the corral. Then the wind swallowed it whole again. Ethan didn't move to the door, but he slid the Winchester into reach and sat back down like a patient rock. Tala lay on the pallet, eyes on the rafters, and her breathing slowly eased, though her hands stayed ready. Ethan whittled a stick at the table, listening to sand and hoofbeats trade places, and wondering which would return first. Morning came gray and gritty, and Ethan woke to sand whispering along the roof like dry corn sliding down slow. Tala was already outside, standing in the lee of the barn, watching the fence line as if counting threats today. He stepped onto the porch with coffee, and she nodded once, not friendly, but not hunted anymore at all. Today, the storm hadn't quit yet. The wind eased enough to show hoof prints near the gate, half buried in sand drifts. Ethan said nothing about him, and Tala didn't ask because both of them understood silence could be a shield, too. She walked to the woodpile, lifted a round log that would make Ethan grunt, and carried it one-handed easy. He tried to hide his surprise, but it leaked out in a low whistle, and she gave a thin shrug. "In my people," she said, "you carry what must be carried, or you don't see another winter alone out here." Ethan pointed at the sagging stable door and asked if she'd help, though he spoke gentle, like permission matters most. Tala grabbed the crossbeam, braced her boots in sand, and shoved until the hinges aligned with a groan again tight. They worked side by side all day, clearing the chute, mending wire, and stacking feed where mice couldn't reach it. Ethan talked little, but he kept handing her tools, and she kept taking them without flinching or smiling once yet. Once her sleeve slid back and he saw fresh cuts and an older scar, shaped like a brand, there too. He wanted to ask who did that, but he remembered her eyes, and he swallowed the question down again, quiet. Near noon, she stopped at the well and drank slowly, then offered the dipper back to him first with respect. That small act hit Ethan harder than strength, because lonely men forget what courtesy feels like after years like his. When dusk started turning copper again, he cooked biscuits and she sat on the floor close to heat for once. Outside, the wind carried a far-off laugh, and Tala's spine stiffened, though her face stayed calm to Ethan then. Ethan set the plate between them and said, "Somebody's riding near, but we don't open that door for no one." Tala looked at him, and for the first time she believed he meant it, even if trouble came tonight again. She touched her wrist marks and asked, soft and blunt, "Why would you shelter an Apache stranger like me here?" Ethan stared into the stove and answered, "'Cause a man ain't a man if he watches evil walk past him." Tala held that answer a long moment, then nodded, and the cabin felt less like a trap for them both. Yet beyond the window, sand kept drifting, and the unseen rider circled, waiting for Ethan to blink first out there. Night settled and the wind eased, but Ethan kept hearing that distant rider pacing the fence like a bored shark. Tala sat near the stove, her palms open to the heat, while Ethan washed dishes, slow, watching shadows quietly today. He set the Winchester on the table, not to threaten her, but to remind himself he still had choices too. She watched the rifle, then looked at his hands, and her voice came out, steady, almost careless tonight for once. "I said that thing at the gate," she murmured, "because men always listen when a woman offers herself first here." Ethan swallowed and answered soft, "I heard it, but I didn't invite you in for that kind of bargain, ever." Tala studied his face, and the firelight showed a bruise along her cheekbone, dark as spilled coffee right there still. She asked, "What do you want then?" And Ethan felt his throat tighten, because he hadn't named wants in years. He pushed a cup toward her and said, "I want you alive through this storm, nothing more demanded from me." Tala let out a breath, and her shoulders dropped like she was setting down a pack she carried forever alone. She stared into the flames and said, "In my world, shelter costs something, even when it looks gentle at first." Ethan nodded once and told her, "My roof ain't a ledger, and my kindness ain't a rope for you either." Outside the window, sand hissed across glass, and a horse snorted far off, then went quiet again behind the mesquite. Tala's eyes flicked to the door, and Ethan saw fear there, not of him, but of who followed her now. He said, "If somebody comes, you stay back, and I'll speak first, because this place is mine today and tomorrow." Tala nodded, then surprised him by asking if he ever had a wife, or if he was born lonely too. Ethan looked at his hands and admitted, "I had love once, and I lost it, so I learned quiet hard." Tala listened, and something in her face softened the way hard ground softens when rain finally returns to dust roads. She scooted closer to the warmth, and Ethan didn't move away, because distance can be a kind of cruelty too. In a low voice, Tala said, "I haven't had sex in months, and I needed to see what you'd do." Ethan kept his eyes on the stove and replied, "I won't touch you unless you ask and mean it plainly." Tala's jaw trembled, and she whispered, "No man ever said that to me, not even the good ones before now." Ethan slid another blanket toward her and said, "Sleep the night as long, and the world can wait outside there." Tala lay down on the pallet, and for the first time her hands unclenched while Ethan listened for hoofbeats anywhere. The next evening the wind fell quiet, and the stove ticked steady, like it was thinking through old troubles alone. Tala sat facing the corner, and Ethan noticed she didn't watch the fire. Now she watched the shadows instead tonight. He set down his cup and said, "Those bruises aren't from sand or work, are they, Tala? Just tell me." She didn't answer quick, and her jaw tightened like she'd bitten on iron to keep a scream inside again tonight. At last she said, "People did it, and not strangers either. The ones who called me sister once before this." Ethan leaned back, and he kept his voice low. "Who in your camp would do that to you, Tala, now?" Her eyes stayed on the floor, and she spoke like a hunter naming tracks my uncle wanted me traded away. He had horses, he had warriors, and he had an old friend across the border, a man with money too. They said I'd be his comfort, and they used that word like it was gentle, but it wasn't ever once. When I said no, Tala continued, they called me proud and they hit me until my ears rang hard daily. They tied my wrists and they dragged me past children so everyone would learn what refusing looks like out there. Ethan's hands curled and he forced them open again, 'cause anger can scare the wounded more than cold itself sometimes. Tala lifted her chin and said, they left me at the canyon edge and told me to disappear forever then. I walked for days, she said, with blood in my boots, and the night wolves kept distance from me somehow. When I saw your light, she whispered, I told myself I'd test you because men smile before they take things. Ethan nodded slowly and he said, I figured you were testing me and I don't blame you one bit either. Tala pulled back her sleeve and the lamplight showed a branded mark. A crooked circle burned deep on her arm. They said it meant ownership, she said, and I believed it for a while until it nearly killed me outright. Ethan reached for the blanket and he offered it like a peace flag, not crossing the space between them yet. He said, this cabin's small, but it ain't a cage, and nobody gets to put their mark on you again. For a long minute, Tala stared at his boots and her voice shook. It has been long since safe felt, Ethan answered. You're safe as I can make it, and if trouble comes, I'll stand between you and it always. Outside, a horse moved in the dark, and Tala heard it too, but she didn't bolt this time at all. She lay down by the stove, and Ethan kept whittling both of them, listening as the night held its breath. By the third day, the sky cleared some, and Ethan knew he had to ride into Dry Creek alone today. Tala stood on the porch, arms crossed, and her eyes followed the trail like it could swallow men whole again. He touched her shoulder lightly and said, I'll be back before dark, I swear it. And she nodded once quietly. Ethan rode out slow, hearing sand crunch under hooves and feeling the weight of her trust behind him now already. Dry Creek sat low in the basin, loud with wagons and louder with talk that never helped anyone much ever. When folks saw Tala's size in Ethan's mind, they smirked and their kindness turned sharp as nails real fast there. At the feed store, a clerk asked, You keeping that Apache woman? And Ethan answered, She's keeping herself, sir, too. Outside the saloon, Deputy Harlan tipped his hat and said there was a reward for runaways lately nearby right now. His smile stayed friendly, but his eyes were hungry, and Ethan felt the same cold as rope marks look there. Harlan leaned close and whispered, Turn her in, Cole, and I'll split the money. No hard feelings between us then. Ethan kept his voice flat and said, I don't sell people, and he walked away without looking back today, Harlan. He went straight to old Mr. Quill, the attorney, a man who hated bullies more than Dust did back then. Quill listened, tapping his pen, and Ethan asked for papers, not ownership, just protection under law for Tala today, sir. The attorney sighed and said the territory allowed a sponsor letter if a rancher swore responsibility in writing right now. Ethan signed slow, and his hand shook once because he knew Harlan would hate this kind of paper, most sure. Quill stamped the page, red wax and all, and said, Keep it dry and keep her close at home, always. On the way out, Ethan bought bandages, salt, and coffee, and he heard laughter follow him again from Harlan's friends. He didn't hurry, but he watched every doorway, 'cause a coward shoots when you act like prey out here first. Dusk turned copper as he rode back, and he saw fresh horse tracks near his fence line again too today. The cabin door opened before he knocked, and Tala's relief flashed quick, then she hit it hard from habit still. Ethan handed her the paper and said, This makes you harder to steal, and she stared at it, long, quiet. Her fingers trembled, and she asked, Why would you do that when the town already hates me so much, Ethan? He answered, Because you deserve a place to stand, and because I'm tired of letting men win like Harlan does. Outside, a horse snorted by the corral, and a man's laugh drifted in, promising the next move after midnight tonight. Night came soft, but the ranch stayed tense, and Ethan kept the lamp low, listening past the stove tonight alone. Tala sat with the paper in her lap, tracing the red seal like it was a door nobody could kick. Ethan said, If a man rides up, you stay back, and I'll speak, because this land is mine here first. She answered, I can break him, but I won't unless you tell me, and that made Ethan blink hard once. Near midnight, a horse snorted by the corral, and a boot scraped wood slow as a thread outside their door. A knock came, 3 taps, then a pause, then 2 more like somebody practiced manners for robbery at home, too. Ethan lifted the Winchester from the table, not aiming yet, and walked to the door, breathing steady, right then quiet. He opened it a hand's width, and lantern light spilled out, showing Deputy Harlan with a grin so thin cold. Beside him stood a traitor named Barlow Hatlow Eyes, quick holding a coil of rope in one hand open. Harlan said, "Cole, that woman is wanted, and we're taking her back, so don't get stubborn on us tonight now." Ethan kept his voice level. "She's under my protection, and I've got papers, so you can leave easy enough, boys." Barlow laughed, showing bad teeth. "Papers burn and women run, and I'm paid to fetch this one, live or not." Behind Ethan, Tala stepped forward into the lamplight, tall as the door frame, and Harlan's grin faltered for one brief second. She said, "You track bare feet for miles, but you still don't know who you're facing right here today, sir." Barlow lifted the rope and Tala's hands tightened, yet Ethan raised a palm and she held still for him alone. Ethan said, "I won't shoot first, but I will shoot if you step past this threshold with that rope again." Harlan spat and claimed the law, but Ethan pointed at the wax seal and said, "Read it slow this time." The deputy didn't read, he just stared because he knew Quill's stamp and he knew Judge's too in Dry Creek. Barlow tried to step around and Tala moved like lightning, blocking him without touching her eyes, flat and dead calm. Ethan said, "You want her, you file a claim and you bring a marshal, not rope and lies at night." Harlan's tone softened like oil on water, and he offered money again, but Ethan shook his head without a word. Tala whispered, "I can end this," and Ethan answered, "Not that way, because you're not a weapon for their fear." Barlow backed off cursing, and Harlan promised return, yet his eyes slid from Tala to Ethan's rifle, then down low. When they rode away, sand swallowed hoofbeats, and Ethan bolted the door, while Tala finally let herself breathe again slow. Dawn came pale, and Ethan hadn't slept because every creak of the barn sounded like Harlan's boots returning again today. Tala stood at the window, paper in her hand, watching the trail, and she didn't look frightened anymore at all. Ethan brewed coffee, then set one cup near her, saying nothing because comfort should never demand a speech from him. He rode to Dry Creek early, found Attorney Quill, and asked for a marshal to witness any claim made today. Quill sent word fast, and by noon a tired marshal arrived, older than Ethan, but sharp-eyed still out there. They returned together, and Tala met them on the porch, tall and steady, with her bruises uncovered on purpose too. The marshal read the protection letter, nodded once, then told Ethan law works best when you don't blink, first son. Tala asked quiet as ash if the law would still help an Apache woman when the town hated her openly. The marshal said it should, and if it didn't, he'd write the judge and shame the deputy in court properly. That evening, Ethan set a lantern at the gate, leaving it lit, so any rider knew they were seen now. Tala walked the fence with him, not as hired muscle, but as a partner choosing her ground at last here. When a horse appeared in the distance, Ethan didn't raise his rifle. He raised his voice and called halt loudly. Harlan rode up with Barlow, but the marshal stepped forward first, and Harlan's smile fell apart right then and there. Barlow waved the rope, yet Tala didn't move, and the marshal warned him. "One more step means jail for sure." Harlan argued about warrants, but Quill's stamp held, and the marshal ordered them to leave the county by sunset today. They turned away slowly, and Ethan watched until the dust swallowed them. Then he exhaled like a man saved twice. Tala didn't cheer. She simply looked at Ethan and asked what happens when the paper runs out on them both. Ethan answered, "It won't run out, 'cause I'll keep choosing you, and you'll keep choosing yourself right here with me." She stepped closer, touched his sleeve, and said, "I stayed to survive, but now I want to live with you." Ethan nodded, shy as ever, then offered his hand, and Tala took it warm and certain this time for good. Behind them, the stove crackled, and the ranch felt bigger because two lonely souls finally shared the same home today. Tonight, the wind finally laid down, and the stars came out clean over Ethan's roof. The marshal rode off at dusk, leaving tracks that faded behind the cottonwoods. Ethan stood on the porch a long time, rifle set aside, listening to quiet that didn't feel empty anymore. Tala came up beside him, and the lantern lit the bruises she no longer tried to hide. She said, "All my life, men told me I belonged to whoever was strongest." Ethan shook his head, and his voice stayed plain. "Strength that takes isn't strength, it's theft." The words hit her like warm water, simple, steady, and hard to argue with. She looked toward the dark trail, then back at the cabin like she was choosing between two worlds. "If they come again," she asked, "will you send me away to keep your name clean?" Ethan let out a slow breath, and he answered, "My name ain't worth much if it's bought with your fear." Tala's throat worked. and she nodded once like a warrior accepting a truce. Inside, Ethan set the protection paper in a tin box, not as a trophy, but as a promise. He pulled a spare plank from the wall and started fixing the gap by the window. Because homes are built in small acts, Tala sat at the table turning a cup in her hands, and for the first time she laughed just a little. "You're shy," she said, and there was no cruelty in it, only wonder. Ethan shrugged, embarrassed, and said, "I'm not built for crowds, I'm built for staying." Tala reached across the table and laid her hand over his, heavy and gentle at once. "Then stay with me," she whispered, "not because you owe me, but because you want to." Ethan didn't answer fast, but his fingers closed around hers, and that was his truth. Out on the range, the coyotes sang, and the night didn't sound like loneliness, it sounded like tomorrow. And if you've ever been judged wrong, friend, tell me this. Would you open your gate or lock it tight tonight?